It's that time of the year again. As it's tradition in the numismatic community, we wrap up the year with an exercise of self-reflection and gratitude. Let me show you my 10 best coin purchase of this year and explain to you what makes them special for me. Making such a list at the end of each year is actually a very useful thing to do. By making a top 10 list, you might have an insight onto where your collection is going, where your personal tastes might be evolving towards, if you should divert more of your budget to a certain area, maybe you should sell some coins and free up some capital to collect something else. And even if you don't care about any of that, it's just a great opportunity of showing some gratitude to stop thinking about what's the next big thing you're going to purchase and just enjoy the wonderful collection you are assembling. And you know what? Before we start, why don't you write in the comment section below which was your top coin purchase of the year? Let us know about that coin you finally managed to get and that you're really proud of. I love reading these comments. So, without further ado, let's get started, and we begin with number 10. Now, I really enjoy 2nd century Roman Imperial Silver. It's a niche of numismatics that is still relatively affordable. You can get some fantastic coins that have great portraits. There's some very solid artistic merit in them. Historically, they're also really cool. You can follow Roman history very closely with these coins. I mean, most important events, particularly at that time, which was arguably the golden age of Rome, all of these events were commemorated on coins, like victories at wars, ascensions of emperors, deification issues for when an emperor died. It's a century very well represented on coinage, and out of all of the so-called 5 good emperors who reigned during this century, I think Hadrian, who we have here, was the one who issued the most coins in consistently high quality, high artistic quality. There are really very few coins of him that I would consider ugly. Most have at least a very acceptable, if not straight up beautiful portrait in them, and this is one of such examples. Here, Hadrian is seen wearing a cuirass. We can see the 2 shoulder flaps quite easily going around his neck and falling down his shoulders. His portraiture changes a lot throughout his reign. In his first years, his portraits look very young, despite him being a middle-aged man when he rose to the purple. Then, as we can see here, he becomes more mature-looking as he ages, and the portraits change accordingly. This type was issued between 134 and 138 AD, right at the end of his life and around the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt in Judea. So this image of him wearing armor actually makes sense, right? It could be an indication of Hadrian himself going on campaign with his troops, which he did. He oversaw the operations in Judea personally, at least in the initial stages. On the reverse, we have Fortuna Reduci, the good fortune of safe returns. Basically, this coin is a wish of the Roman mint, the Roman people, for the safe return of the emperor to Rome after the campaign. Hadrian, of course, was famous for going on very long tours around the empire, seeing as much of his empire as he could, and he was a little bit of a micromanager. And that was the case for this coin. When it was struck, Hadrian had already left Judea, most likely. He must have considered the troops already had the situation under control, because he went on his last tour throughout the whole Eastern Mediterranean region before returning back to Rome in 136, where he lived the last 2 years of his life. Pretty little coin, tangentially related to historical events of the time, and all in all, this very pleasant denarius I enjoy. So number 10 it is. Now let's go with number 9, the heaviest coin of this video, this chunky 32-gram hemidrachma issued in Egypt under Ptolemy III. The Ptolemies conquered Egypt after claiming and quickly seizing the territory, right after Alexander's death, advertising themselves to the people there as Alexander the Great's successors. The enormous wealth of Egypt and its large population that could be enlisted to war or the king's projects helped turn Egypt into the longest lasting and most stable of all of the successor Greek kingdoms. So as the Greeks took over, something else came to Egypt. The Egyptians really never had a systematic experience before, and that was regular issues of coinage. Some of the last native pharaohs did strike coins, mainly to pay mercenaries and for external trade, but their internal economy was still mostly run on commodities, grain, accounts of trade, metal in bulk, in bullion, rather than everyday coins with state-defined face values. And that changes under the early Ptolemies. And also, you see, silver, the monetary metal for excellence for the Greeks, it was relatively scarce in Egypt. So instead of operating a system with small silver fractions like the drachma, the hemidrachma, like the other Greek kingdoms, the Ptolemies leaned heavily on big bronze pieces that filled these roles in daily transactions. The only silver coin struck in significant numbers was the tetradrachma. And as you can see here in my hand, this hemidrachma, it's quite a substantial coin. But keep in mind that's half the size of a full bronze drachma. These are incredible coins. I plan on getting one someday. So this gorgeous little thing here was issued at Alexandria under Ptolemy III, as I said, and he ruled from 246 to 222 BC, so the mid to late 3rd century BC. Now, for me, what really stands out with these Ptolemaic bronzes is just the sheer quality of the metalwork. This isn't just like a circular piece of metal cast in a circular shape. They had a lot of extra steps on the manufacture to make sure these looked great and were hard to counterfeit. So, for example, the little dimple in the center, the almost perfectly circular rim, and the very even flat surfaces on both sides all point out to maybe it was likely that the planchet for this coin was turned. It was shaped on some sort of lathe or some similar rotating device before striking. You sometimes still see like the faint concentric lines, like some little circles on the fields. And this is all a sign that the coin was once in some sort of device that had a circular motion that left these marks. And that kind of preparation meant the engravers knew they would be placing the dies against perfectly flat flans that would receive all of the design. So on the obverse, you get this powerful head of Zeus, or more precisely, Zeus Ammon, with that mane of wind-swept hair and beards, and the curling horn of Ammon behind the ear, blending Greek and Egyptian religious ideas. It's a really powerful portrait. And on the reverse, we have the very common Ptolemaic eagle, a symbol that is almost universal across the Ptolemaic period. Anything that didn't have an eagle on its reverse was most likely a commemorative issue of some sort and quite rare. So these large bronze coins existed because of, as I said, this unusual situation Egypt was in regarding its gold and silver ratio. Since Egypt's supply of precious metals was so uneven, there was plenty of gold from its mines and down south from Nubia, but it had far less silver available to them. It was mostly acquired through trade. The Ptolemies ended up developing what is called a closed monetary system. So in practical terms, foreign coins were not meant to circulate freely inside Egypt, and Egyptian coins were not supposed to wander out. And this way they could control the exchange of coins and, of course, charge a fee for this. This would allow the state to accumulate silver. So yeah, wonderful coin and an example of one of the world's earliest fiduciary systems. Number 9 it gets. Okay, now let's go to number 8. Once again, we have a small Roman imperial silver coin, and you might be thinking this looks like yet another denarius, but no, it is not. It was struck in the very end of the 3rd century, between 295 and 297. Very short time window. And this coin is called an argenteus. This was a denomination introduced by Diocletian in his monetary reform, which made away with the old, decrepit monetary system that had been eaten away by inflation, and he introduced what numismatists call today late Roman coinage. It's actually a series of monetary systems, but basically Diocletian sort of like marks the point where you have the original monetary standard and then you have what is called the late standard. Now, the Argenteus was a complete failure. This coin was issued with a face value that was not in line with the rest of the monetary system. This was a silver coin of very high purity, 90%. No Roman alive by that time had ever seen a silver coin that pure. But for its face value, it had much more silver per face value, per denomination, when compared to smaller denominations, which means people prefer to spend the smaller denominations and hoard these coins because they had a disproportionately high amount of silver, of intrinsic value of silver in them. And the authorities quickly caught up with the fact people were just hoarding these coins, and they just stopped making these, preferring to make the smaller denominations which used less fine silver. This means these little coins here are surprisingly rare to find, a little bit expensive, and I managed to get one for a reasonable price, which is awesome. This particular one was issued in Trier for Diocletian's colleague, Maximianus, and design-wise, it's a fairly standard-looking coin. We have the bust of the emperor looking to the right, and by that time, portraits were not personalized anymore. They didn't look like the person they were meant to represent. So, for example, if you got another Argenteus, one issued for Diocletian, you would only be able to tell the two emperors apart for the legends on the coins. But still, pretty charming little thing. On the reverse, we have a nice scene shown in perspective. We have the 4 co-emperors, this imperial college that was called the Tetrarchy, which would translate to the rule of 4. There were 2 senior emperors and 2 junior Caesars, and in this scene over here, they're all sacrificing at an altar, right in front of a military camp, in this show of unity between them. These were all men who came from the ranks of the military, as with most emperors of that time, and we can see this clearly militaristic theme here. The empire was, in practical terms, a military dictatorship at that time. In the legends, virtus militum, the virtue, the valor of the army, reflects that support for the troops. So, more than a piece of artistic prowess or anything like that, I like this coin because it is a bit of an economics lesson in itself. It is a coin that was too valuable, something weird at a time of inflation and overvalued currencies. And it's just a show of how government sometimes, maybe most of the times, simply doesn't know how to fix certain problems in the economy. I mean, all that work to make a brand new monetary system only for people to just use the lowest value denominations because the system was dysfunctional from the very beginning. So yeah, a really interesting history of economics focused coin. So it gets number 8. Okay, number 7, and we get a little denarius of Antoninus Pius. So at first glance, it looks like there is nothing dramatic going on with this piece. It's quote-unquote just a silver denarius of Antoninus Pius, and because his reign was very long and peaceful, his coins are very common. But that's exactly where things get interesting. When you start looking deeper into the mountains of denarii from this man that are out there, you see, once you start specializing in a series. In my case, as I said, I love 2nd century denarii. The more you study it, the more you find yourself getting drawn into the tiny varieties. Stuff like the early and very late issues of an emperor, what changes between them, stylistic changes, visual trends. Maybe you go on a hunt for dies of a quality that deviate of the norm for the time that you're collecting. So basically something that would go unnoticed for someone who didn't specialize in that little niche. And this coin is a really cool example of that natural tendency of one becoming more specialized. It looks like a standard denarius, but it was struck in the very first months of Antoninus's reign, right in this brief time window between Hadrian's death, his predecessor, and the ceremony where the Roman Senate gave Antoninus his popular surname, the Pius, the Pious. I know this might sound very irrelevant for most of you guys, but when you start getting deeper into this kind of coinage, it matters, and it turns out as a pretty freaking rare coin. So on the obverse, we have this bare-headed bust of Antoninus. I love these early portraits of him. These are probably the best. The portrait still follows this late Hadrian style, so soft details on the beard, the face. His hair has these carefully rendered curls going in different directions. He has this elegant, calm expression, which is consistent with what the records say his character was. Antoninus was a very chill emperor. And there was also the issue of denarii having very small flens. So, I mean, it's a tiny little silver coin of 3 grams. So engravers didn't have a lot of space to work with, to add intricacies. So when you see these tiny coins with these very complex looking busts, very details, you know you're right in front of something special. So let's get to the legends, to the nerdy part. What makes this coin special for me? Instead of the familiar Antoninus Augustus Pius, here we have a previous formula which reads Imperator Titus Aelius Caesar Antoninus Augustus. And in this case, no mention at all of Pius. Usually you would have Antoninus Augustus Pius. So these rare pre-Pius legends were struck in the few weeks after Hadrian's death in July 138, and as I said, like before the Senate agreed to deify Hadrian and reward Antoninus with this cognomen Pius for his dedication to the previous emperor. So, to someone outside the hobby, that might sound like a very minor detail. After all, it's just a missing word, but once you start specializing, that's just one of the consequences of collecting. And of course, there's the added cool factor that this different in the legends connects this coin to a direct series of events in the past. And this allows us to pinpoint the issue of this coin to just within a few weeks, which is really impressive. As for the reverse, we have Minerva, and she makes a lot of sense in this reverse. Minerva is shown standing, holding a small victory on one hand, and with her spear and shield by her side. We also have the legends Pontifex Maximus Tribunicia Potestas Consul, marking out his first term as Pontifex Maximus, Consul, and his first year with tribunician powers. So it reinforces this coin as being struck in the very beginning of his reign. After all, he was taking public office, all of the typical public offices of the emperor, for the very first year. Minerva shows up very often on coins of Caesars or emperors in their first years of rule. In the Nerva Antonine period, when this coin was made, the expected way to pass on the principate was by adoption. The current emperor picked from the Roman elites and his inner circles for a successor, not in theory the most powerful or the richest, but the one best suited to be the next guardian of the state. And that whole idea of a steward of the Roman world is nicely summarized with this goddess. Minerva represents this wish of an enlightened monarch, this protector of civilized Roman life. She's often shown in this vigilant pose, almost aggressive, I would say, as if she was prepared to defend Rome by force. And that was exactly what the Roman people expected from their new emperor. Yeah, humble little coin, but aesthetically very well accomplished and oozing with historical significance. So it makes it to the list. And this week's episode is proudly sponsored by Alhambra Precious Metals. Ran by two very passionate ancient coin collectors and with years of experience in the numismatic and bullion markets, this business offers a finely curated selection of ancient coins. It's really nice to see the American coin market beginning to see businesses with a high level of expertise in ancient coins. Offering a wide selection of Roman, Greek, Byzantine, among other types of ancients, every coin they sell is guaranteed authentic for life. These are people who handle ancients every single day and understand the provenance, grading, and proper identification and attribution, as well as the realities of today's coin market. I'm really delighted to be able to feature a business with what I consider some of the best market practices out there. So if you've been thinking about adding a new ancient coin to your collection from a reputable source, or a great place where you can acquire precious metals to your portfolio, make sure to check them out at alhambrapreciousmetals.com. Alright, number 6. We continue in Imperial Rome during the 2nd century. Once again, this is a Hadrian coin, but this time we have a Dupondius. Dupondi are very interesting, especially in their technical aspect, some quirks related to its manufacture. First of all, they were made out of brass instead of copper. Brass is really hard to produce with pre-industrial metallurgy. It's a mix of copper and zinc, but zinc has a very low boiling point compared to copper, so you couldn't just throw the two metals in a crucible and heat them up. You would lose most of the zinc, it would boil away, leaving you with mostly copper. The Romans developed a few techniques to trap the zinc in the crucible, and the result was an alloy that had a golden appearance. This piece doesn't have that color anymore. There's this interesting green, brownish patina that has developed over it. And the Romans really liked the color of brass. They called it orichalcum, meaning something like golden copper. The other interesting technical detail of these coins has to do with its manufacture. The rim of Dupondi is generally quite square. It has sharp, angular edges, different from copper coins which have thin rims. This is probably due to the fact the brass for these coins had to be made in a closed crucible, so the zinc wouldn't boil away. I theorize these were made in some sort of like a rod. Imagine a closed crucible with a long, tube-shaped receptacle for the copper and the zinc to mix. After this new brass rod was removed from the furnace, it was cut into slices. Imagine a piece of salami being cut, and these slices were the blanks for these coins. So this production method resulted in these thick rims and these thick coins. As for the design, as I said, this is yet another coin of Hadrian. The Dupondius was worth 2 asses. You would need to have 8 of these in exchange for 1 silver denarius, so this was a more manageable amount of money for your everyday expenses. Apart from the color and the shape of the coin, the design on these pieces shows the emperor wearing a radiate crown. You can see it has this spiky crown on the emperor's head here, meant to differentiate it from the single ass, which was red in color, and it showed the emperor with a laurel crown instead. I mean, just wonderful design. It has a fair bit of wear, but you can still see that due to the larger size of this coin, the die engravers could add a lot more detail to the die, to the portrait. You see like the hair, the beard, the overall shape of the face. It's all very pleasant and it's all very full of detail. The reverse isn't that appealing. I find the reverse of these base metal denominations often has a much weaker strike to them. That's probably because the obverse die was fixed to the anvil, while the reverse was the one that mint workers had to manually place over the blank at the time of striking, so the distribution of force from the striking process wasn't as good on the reverse. Still, we have a charming image of equitas, equality. Although this could also be moneta, the two goddesses have very similar designs. They're generally shown carrying the same items, a set of scales and a cornucopia, the horn of abundance. Gorgeous little coin. Alright, number 5, and that's a very curious coin I was looking forward to buying for a long time. What we have here is an Athenian tetradrachma, but as some of you might have noticed, it looks a little bit weird. That's because this is a P-style tetradrachma. These were struck sometime after the famous Athenian owls, which come roughly from the classical period, so the 5th century BC. The P style is from the 4th century, in the early Hellenistic period, when Athens was basically a pale shadow of its former self. Around 350 BC, the Athenians did something very interesting. They withdrew and demonetized the early tetradrachma and ordered them to be brought in to the mint and restruck in this new type. The most likely cause was due to some very serious fiscal crisis that was affecting Athens during these times of decadence, and the state needed a quick way to raise revenue without finding new silver. So they called in the old owls, they valued them at face value, they reminted them, and then they paid back out the coins to people with a small premium over the bullion value. Since there was a difference in price between the metal price and the face value, the city could effectively skim off a few percent of the silver as a profit for the treasury and, in practical terms, as an emergency tax. And the technique they used is very unique. I don't think I've ever seen anyone do it this way. Instead of melting everything down, casting new round blanks, and striking them with the new design, the mint workers just grabbed an earlier tetradrachma, heated it up, not to a point of melting it down, but maybe it was like red hot. They hammered it somewhat flat, and then folded this pancaked coin over its own surface, like maybe once or twice into these new thicker flans that you can see here. And finally, once they had this folded pancake, they struck this folded flan with the new design. This folding and restriking gave these coins this unusual, like short, chunky flan that old Greek numismatists nicknamed koutsora, meaning log or tree stump. On the obverse, at first glance, nothing changed. You can still recognize the familiar head of Athena. But if you look a bit closer, the differences from the classical owls start jumping out. The style is clearly less refined, the lines are heavier, the engraving is a little bit clumsy. Especially in this coin, the portrait is very crude, almost cartoonish, and I actually find this quite charming. The big change is in the eye, the big stylistic change. Instead of this famous frontal eye of the 5th century owls, where Athena seems to be staring right out of the coin, although her face looks to the side, here, finally, her eye is properly shown in profile, looking sideways, the way a real face would. On my particular example, a lot of the helmet ornaments, which help nail down the subtype of this coin, are gone. Not because the die was poorly engraved, but because the flan is so short, is so lumpy and compact that much of the design never made it to the metal in the first place. Yet, despite this stubby appearance, it still weighs the full weight of a tetradrachma. This one sits around 17.3 grams, perfectly acceptable for the Attic standard. It reminds me of that joke, what weighs more, 1 kilogram of iron or 1 kilogram of feathers? And some people say 1 kilogram of iron because it's denser. It's like if this joke repeats itself with this coin. I often look at the design of the coin without focusing on how thick, how compact the coin is, and I always feel surprised when this coin weighs the same as another much wider, as in a much wider in diameter piece does. And finally, heading to the reverse, the poor Athenian owl on this die looks a bit terrified. Poor ragged little thing. You have these bulging eyes, maybe a little bit too big for that little head. The posture is a little bit stiff. The body looks a little bit skinny, a bit malnourished. It's like if the proud Athenian owl had just realized how far Athens had fallen from its glory days. And in historical terms, that isn't far from the truth. These coins belong to a city with a great past, the richest, the most important of all Greek polis. And now, here it was, trying to patch up its finances and being forced to tax its citizenry and withdraw the coins to pass an emergency tax. If we don't mind the artistic decline, it's interesting to see they were very traditional with the design. I mean, it's all still here. We still have the owl standing right with its head facing, the ethnic Alpha, Theta, Epsilon on the right, Athenaion, and to the left a couple of olive leaves and a crescent moon. Is it a spectacular looking coin, this one? Not at all, especially considering these were made as a visual downgrade, a successor after one of the world's most famous coin designs. It looks rushed, the owl looks awkward, but sometimes what makes someone or something weird and quirky is what makes it fascinating. You know, empires rise and fall, and Athens rose and it fell. And the fall of a nation is also worth being studied and, of course, collected. So that's why it made it to the list. Number 4. This little baby right here shows how your coins don't need to be mint state or perfectly produced in order to be visually pleasant. This coin has lots of scratches, it has some dings, it has a few deposits around small crevices, like the flocks of hair here in the obverse. And in a numismatic market where big, heavy Greek silver like this one will almost always be in very high demand and command high prices, compromising for a coin like this, with a few problems but substantially cheaper due to these small defects, but still visually pleasant overall, I think that's a very reasonable compromise for collectors in a tighter budget. I find it funny when talking with modern coin collectors and they say, oh, this is a problem coin. The problem coin term is said like they're mentioning a boogeyman. And I know for modern coin collections, condition and small damage like that can be very detrimental to the value of a coin. But for ancients, you just need to accept that these are over 2,000 years old. If you only collect pristine coins, you might see yourself limited to a restricted number of coins, and considering all of the interesting pieces that are out there, putting yourself inside this very small box feels like a wasted opportunity of enjoying this hobby to its fullest extent. So this is a Seleucid tetradrachma struck between 128 and 123 BC, when the Seleucids were starting to enter its terminal decline. The kingdom was reduced to basically a rump state, the area around Antioch and its surrounding areas. Civil wars and pressure from its neighbors was very strong, and this gentleman we have here, Alexander II, also called Alexander Zabinas, he didn't help much to improve the situation. He was himself a usurper, propped up by Ptolemy VI of Egypt to seize the Seleucid crown and make it a puppet state of Egypt. One of the things that surprises me about Seleucid coinage is how, even in these desperate times of civil wars, they still managed to produce a very high quality coins. I mean, the portrait in this coin, and all coins up to the very end of the Seleucid state, they look gorgeous. I mean, the flocks of hair, the very organic looking royal diadem on his head, the fact some of the hair flocks fall over the diadem, obscuring it from view and adding further three-dimensionality to the design. Of course, the fine details on his facial features, it's all very pleasant to look at. The reverse is very traditional for the time. Most late Seleucid pieces show Zeus, the king of the gods, in this desperate attempt to claim authority for themselves, as Zeus was considered to be the ultimate show of authority for a ruler. It's interesting to see that this image, that of Zeus sitting on a throne holding his scepter and a small Nike on his outstretched hand, it's an old design that can be traced back to Alexander the Great himself and his direct successors. They also use this kind of image on their own coins. And here it is, another Alexander, let's say a cheap fake of Alexander, a usurper, 2 centuries after the original Alexander, using the same imagery once again. It's a bit ironic, it illustrates very well the decline of the Hellenistic world during the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. Apart from the image of Zeus at the center, to the left and to the right we have some very straightforward legends. It reads Alexandrou Basileus, of King Alexander. Great piece, very deserving of the top 10 list. So, okay, we have finally reached the podium. Number 3. After enjoying that massive 17 grams tetradrachma, we go for a tiny fractional coin, less than a single drachma. It weighs just 2.5 grams. These are generally called the fifth of a tetradrachma, which for me sounds like a horrible name. It's too confusing. This is more like a tetraoble, really, so 4 obols. Okay, what do we have here? A coin from Macedon. This type of coin was issued for a very long time. It was originally introduced around the 350s BC by Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great. This particular piece was made much later, around 315 to the 290s BC, so of course that's a posthumous piece. And it shows on the obverse this lovely portrait of the god Apollo. Now, I hope the camera can get the crazy rainbow toning this coin has. Silver is funny, it is finicky sometimes. It sometimes just becomes this dull black color, and that's it, but at other occasions it does what you see here. It develops this crazy rainbow toning, depending on the chemicals it was exposed to when it was in storage. I mean, the atmosphere, the materials that a coin cabinet, for example, was made out of. And fortunately, in this case, we won the toning lottery because that is a lovely little coin to look at. And of course, the fact this piece it's pretty much in mint state makes it even more special. As for the reverse, which sadly isn't that well struck, but also counts with this lovely toning, we have an image of a young man riding a horse while carrying a palm branch, the symbol of military victory. There are a few proposed explanations to the design, from Philip being so enamored of his prized horses that won him the Olympic Games that he just had to advertise it on his coins, or another theory, which is probably a more realistic reason, that was just that this design was a display of his own military victories. Philip deserves more attention from collectors because he was the one who initially developed, for example, the phalanx, that compact mass of soldiers with long spikes that Alexander used with great effect when forging his empire. And it was also thanks to Philip that his son had such a well-organized and well-trained army to his disposal. And Philip put a lot of effort in Alexander's initial education and training. He could not have achieved what he did without his father. So, here on this coin, above the horseman, just to indicate who issued it in faint letters, we can read Filippo, something like of Philip, coin issued by Philip. A wonderful little gem. For me, a mix of a much needed coin of a major historical character and just a joy of a coin to look at. I would be lying if I said there wasn't a component of eye candy in acquiring this coin. Number 3 gets. Now to number 2. We have the only gold coin of this year. So this year I had to be more cost conscious about the collection. And as you've been seeing, the price of gold has been steadily increasing. And it's not like the price of gold directly affects the price of an ancient coin made out of this metal. It's just that at least it makes a floor to its price. And even Byzantine coins, which typically have the lowest premiums amongst ancient coins, they have been increasing in price. Still, this was a coin that was high up in my priority list. First of all, it closes up my set of early Byzantine gold coins. I had the full solidus, its third, the tremisis, and now I have the half solidus, the semisis, probably the scarcest of these 3 denominations. Well, it's not that these coins are rare, but I had to be patient when hunting down for this coin. And let me tell you, having the 3 denominations, one next to the other, is a very pleasant thing for me as a collector, that's for sure. Now, apart from that, it was issued under Justinian the Great. Justinian is famous for many accomplishments, and one of them was his attempt at the Restauratio Imperii, his attempt at restoring the Western Roman Empire. He was, well, partly successful, and he spent a lot of the gold diligently hoarded by his predecessors to achieve that. So I can't help myself to think if such a coin wasn't at one point held by one of his soldiers under the command of his his legendary general Belisarius. Visually, it's a relatively bland coin. It has a very schematic portrait of the emperor looking to the right, in similar style to the coins made in the late empire. So the emperor wearing a jewel diadem, he's wearing some royal robes, and his cloak is held in place by a little fibula. And of course, around the portrait, we have the legends still in Latin. Dominus Noster, Justinianus Perpetuus Augustus. It's interesting to note that the legends are still in Latin, even if the Eastern Empire was mostly Greek-speaking. During Justinian's time, there must have still been a sizable Latin-speaking community, but it was certainly a minority by then. But I guess the coins just still used Latin out of tradition. And on the reverse, to distinguish this coin from the Tremises, both coins are nearly the same size, but the Semisis was substantially heavier at 2.3 grams instead of the Tremises' 1.5, we have the image of a seated Victory, the pagan goddess that represented victory. So she's seated and she's making an inscription on a shield, like a commemorative inscription. It's interesting to see that the empire had been Christian for a few centuries by then, but still, just like the legends in Latin, the tradition, the visual tradition was just too strong. These supposedly pagan images were just, culturally, they were too connected with the idea of money and Roman art, and they just kept being used on coins. Around the legends, we read Victoria Augustorum, the victory of our emperors, and at the very bottom, some kind of quality control on the part of the mint. The Byzantines operated a gold standard for most of their history, and these denominations were actually valued on their weight in gold, not as a fixed face value. All of the many bronze denominations that are so common in Byzantine coinage, these all had a face value, but a solidus or a semisis or a tremisis, they were worth a solidus, a semisis, and a tremisis. They were worth their gold. The metal in them was the money. And this inscription here at the bottom, Konob, it stands for Constantinopolis Obrisiacum. It was like a sign of guarantee from the Constantinople mint that this coin was made out of the best gold that they could refine. The solidus was struck in very high quality gold for centuries. Its history is, in my opinion, one of the best arguments for how gold is a great monetary metal and a great hedge for a nation's monetary system. And here we are, number 1. My favorite coin purchase for this year is yet another Seleucid tetradrachma. This one was issued under Antiochus VIII, also called Antiochus Gryphus, or hook-nosed, because as we can see on his portrait already, he had a pretty substantial oxygen siphon. Antiochus here was the last Seleucid king to have a somewhat long reign, from 125 to 96 BC, but in typical Seleucid fashion, it was plagued with civil wars and major challenges. Now, once again, quite a charming and well-made portrait, even if the model for the coin wasn't a particularly attractive man, but still, very nice, high-quality coin. The surfaces in this example are just pristine. I really like the metal quality of this piece. It has this very nice toning, mixing black and golden accents. And as for the king himself, historically, he wasn't a particularly important historical character, but I find it fascinating how he fully embraced the fact that, well, the Seleucid state was doomed. He knew his kingdom was on borrowed time. Maybe he didn't make this public, this feeling, but we can see that he made the minimum effort to maintain his rule. And apart from this maintenance, the man just enjoyed himself. Apparently he was quite popular with the population. He made sure to engage in the same bread and circuses policy the Romans would later go on doing. He was constantly organizing festivals to maintain the happiness of the people of Antioch. He threw lavish parties to the elites, and his legacy was that of a degenerate, but a very socially apt degenerate, who managed to last surprisingly long, until of course he was killed off and succeeded by his killer. So yeah, good on you, Antiochus. Guess sometimes you can't do anything when the world is burning, so you might as well just feel the warmth and the cozy feeling while everything burns. As for the reverse, once more we have the image of the seated Zeus. This flan is a little bit on the shorter side, so not all of the reverse legends can be read, but it reads Basileus Antiocho Epiphanos, so of King Antiochus the illustrious, the glorious, a very common epithet Seleucid kings gave themselves. That's an interesting Zeus we have here. It's certainly a bit blockier, less anatomically correct if compared to previous issues, but I like this reverse. Every little crevice of the design is filled with details, from this chunky Zeus here in the center to the big, bold letters that don't leave any spaces between them, to the nice little olive crown around the design, serving as a border for the whole thing. I just think it's a gorgeous little coin. From a minor historical character, yes, but the more I collect ancient coins, the more I enjoy these pieces that connect very well to a character with a very well-defined personality. It gives this uniqueness in like a personal connection, a unique personal history. And Antiochus VIII was a very unique king. So, number one for this coin. Alright, we wrap it up for 2025. This was a great year for the channel. We managed to grow the audience substantially. We had a video go viral with around, 600,000 views? For a video on ancient coins, that's crazy. Hopefully, if you're watching this in the future, it will have way more views and the channel will have an even larger audience. And yeah, happy holidays. Thank you for being here, for joining as a member, joining my Patreon, my newsletter, and let's hope 2026 brings us all some more amazing coins. So yeah, happy collecting, Merry Christmas, may God bless you, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.